Ms. Bennett, please stand in the center. Everyone else, please move to either side. The host had barely finished speaking when every camera in the room lifted at once. Flashbulbs exploded into sheets of white, as if they were trying to nail every face on that stage into the day's headlines. Ethan Reed stood at the far edge. He shifted only half a step. And just like that, he had completely moved out of the center of the shot. No one reminded him to step forward. No one thought anything was wrong. A stock exchange staff member was looking down, confirming the schedule in a clipped voice. After the countdown ends, we'll ring the bell, take photos, and then open the floor for media questions. Opening data will be pushed to the screen in real time. Please remain in your assigned positions. Assigned positions. Ethan listened to those 2 words and swept his gaze across the stage before it stopped on Olivia Bennett. She was dressed sharply today. Her shoulders straight. Her back held high. Standing in the brightest spot. It was not the posture of someone who had been pushed into the spotlight. It was the posture of someone who had climbed there step by step on her own and now refused to ever step down again. The host raised the microphone. His smile warm and practiced. Today, we are here to witness the successful NYSE listing of Bennett Tech. From startup to public company, Ms. Olivia Bennett has led her team all the way to this moment. It is truly an industry success story. Thunderous applause erupted from the audience. A reporter immediately asked, Ms. Bennett, as the public face of the company, what is the biggest lesson you've learned along the way? Olivia took the microphone. The corners of her lips lifted slightly, and her voice was steady without the slightest tremor. I've learned one thing. Direction matters more than effort. As long as your judgment is right, the team won't take the wrong road. She said it beautifully. Beautifully enough that it almost made people forget that every critical shift in direction the company had ever made had not, in the end, been decided by her. Ethan said nothing. He only lowered his eyes and pressed his fingertips carefully against his palm. Last night, for the final compliance review before the listing, he had not slept at all. Even the cuffs of his shirt still carried a chill that had not faded. But now, that chill was nothing compared to her light, effortless phrase. Your judgment is right. He could have taken half a step forward. If he said even one sentence, many faces in the room would change. But he did not. Today was the company's listing day. It was not the day to tear everything open. The host lifted a hand, signaling for silence. Next, Ms. Bennett will ring the opening bell. The music surged. Olivia stepped forward and raised her hand to grip the bell hammer. The lights followed her. It was as if everyone's breath was caught in her hand. She looked back at the crowd. When her gaze passed over Ethan, it paused for only an instant. So fast it almost seemed like an illusion. Then the bell rang out. Deep, clear, powerful enough to make the entire hall tremble. The numbers on the big screen flickered, and the red figures began to climb. The room went silent for one beat, then erupted into even louder cheers. It's up. Opening gain looks good. Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. An industry titan stepped forward with a smile and offered her his hand. Young and impressive. To build a company to this scale. Ms. Bennett, your courage and skill are extraordinary. A representative from an investment firm nodded along. The market likes it. We're very optimistic about the company's future. There is still much more room to grow. Applause rose again. The light in Olivia's eyes grew brighter and brighter. It was not simple happiness. It was a kind of certainty that grew rapidly after being lifted high by everyone around her. As if that bell had truly hammered all the credit, power, and judgment into her alone. Ethan looked at the big screen. His Adam's apple moved slowly. He had walked this road with her for 7 years. At the hardest times, the supply chain had broken. The cash flow had collapsed. During the worst crisis, a partner pulled out at the last minute, and the entire project nearly died the night before signing. That night, he had run a fever and still called one person after another, rebuilt proposal after proposal, and dragged the people and the money back by force. Now, the bell had rung. The market had approved. But the person standing in the center of the cheers looked more and more like someone else. Mr. Reed, aren't you going to the front? A reporter suddenly turned the question toward him. As if only then remembering that someone like him was still present. Ethan said, today's main character isn't me. The reporter's eyes lit up, wanting to dig deeper. People outside say Ms. Bennett built the company single-handedly. Do you agree with that? It was a sharp question. Several eyes turned toward him at the same time. Ethan lifted his gaze and looked at Olivia, who was surrounded by the crowd. His voice was so calm it sounded almost cold. Let's see where the stock closes today. With one sentence. He neither agreed nor exposed anything. The reporter wanted to follow up, but the host smoothly cut in with a smile. Friends from the media, please proceed to the interview area later. We'll make sure everyone gets enough time. The atmosphere became lively again, but the breath that had been pressing in Ethan's chest for so long had been fully awakened by that question. It was like a spark falling into dry grass. It did not explode, but it smoldered all the way through, burning dull and heavy. Inside the VIP lounge, the atmosphere was even more subtle than it had been on stage. A senior executive was practically glued to Olivia's side, reporting to her in an excessively respectful tone. Ms. Bennett, several institutions are waiting for you to decide the follow-up roadshow schedule. There are also media interviews. We suggest keeping only your solo interviews. That will keep the message focused and help shape the company's image. Yes. Another executive immediately added. After going public, the decision chain must become more centralized. Many things should be approved by you personally. That will also stabilize outside expectations. Olivia held a cup in her hand and listened carefully. The restraint in her eyes was loosening little by little. I know. She nodded. Organize the follow-up process first. Send the important matters directly to me. Yes. Ms. Bennett. The answer came too quickly, as if they had all been waiting for her to say exactly that. Ethan stood not far away. His expression did not change, but his knuckles tightened slowly. Before the listing, many documents had never been sent directly to her. Risk control, financing, mergers and acquisitions, valuation adjustment clauses. Every item had gone through him. Now these people kept saying approved by you, as if he had never existed. What was even more glaring was Julian Hayes. He had been standing beside Olivia the entire time. He did not steal the spotlight or speak out of turn, but he always managed to add a sentence at exactly the right moment. After a listing, the biggest taboo is scattered authority, he said in a low voice. Like a reminder. And even more like temptation. Olivia. It wasn't easy getting here. Since you're already in this position, you should hold the power firmly. Other people can help you once. They can't help you forever. His voice was not loud, but it pierced Ethan's ear like a needle. Other people. So that was what he had become. Other people. Olivia did not refute him. Instead, she pressed her lips together, as if weighing the words, or perhaps silently agreeing. Then she looked up and asked the executive, how long after the listing can we fully review the officer of record filing and authorization process? Ethan's eyes darkened at once. The executive froze for a second, then quickly replied, as long as you decide. Ms. Bennett, the process can move very quickly. Julian added smoothly. It's better to prepare early than be forced into a passive position later. The air went quiet for a moment. Ethan finally stepped forward and stood before them. He did not lose his temper. He did not raise his voice. He only looked at Julian. You seem very familiar with the company's internal processes. The smile on Julian's face did not change. I'm only thinking one step ahead for Olivia. One step ahead. Ethan stared at him. Or reaching one hand too far. As soon as the words fell, the temperature in the lounge seemed to drop by several degrees. The executives wisely shut their mouths. Olivia frowned slightly and spoke first. Today is the listing day. Do you really have to make an issue of this right now? Ethan looked at her. The fire in his chest had finally burned up into his throat. Am I making an issue of it? Or are you moving too fast? Olivia's tone went cold immediately. Ethan Reed. What is that supposed to mean? What does it mean? You don't understand. He spoke each word slowly. His voice was still steady, but there was already cold pressure in his eyes. The opening bell just rang. And someone is already teaching you how to tighten your grip on power. How to change the process. How to make every matter pass through only your hands. Olivia Bennett. Did you really not hear it? Or is this what you wanted all along? The sentence tore through the surface too quickly. Olivia's face darkened instantly. But Julian chose that moment to speak softly. "Mr. Reed, don't misunderstand. I'm only worried that Olivia trusts other people too much and ends up getting hurt." Ethan snapped his gaze toward him. His eyes were as cold as blades. "Other people. Again. Other people." Suddenly, Ethan laughed. But the smile did not reach his eyes. "And who the hell are you to warn her about me?" The lounge fell completely silent. Even the reporters holding cameras nearby sensed that something was wrong and began looking over. Olivia's expression changed sharply. "Enough." The word landed heavily. Almost like it had been thrown at him in public. She looked at Ethan. There was not a trace of comfort in her eyes. Only impatience and anger after feeling offended. Was Julian wrong? Before the listing, "You could help me because the company was still climbing uphill. But now it's different. I'm standing in front. So I have to take full responsibility. If authority isn't centralized, the outside world will only think the company is chaotic inside." Ethan stared at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. She was not being deceived. She was not being led astray. She was enjoying it. Enjoying everyone orbiting around her. Enjoying every "you approve it." Enjoying the feeling of control that came from pushing him bit by bit out of the core. That was more infuriating than any provocation. She knew better than anyone how many dirty things he had blocked for her. Now she resented him for standing too close. For blocking her from shining alone. Another wave of noise came from outside. The opening data refreshed for the second time. And the gain was still climbing. The cheers traveled through the glass. As if applauding this imbalance of power. Reporters had already crowded around the door. Calling out one after another. "Ms. Bennett, can you respond to the company's post-listing strategy? Ms. Bennett, will there be any management restructuring next?" At that question, something flashed through Julian's eyes. It was quick. But it did not escape Ethan. Suddenly, he understood. Today's spotlight. From the positioning to the talking points. From the interviews to the media direction. Had not simply happened naturally. Someone had been watching this moment for a long time. They wanted to use the momentum of the listing to push Olivia completely onto the one and only high seat. Then erase him from everyone's understanding. And Olivia was actively walking forward. She did not even look back at him. She had already composed her expression and prepared to step out for the next round of cameras. As she brushed past him, Ethan said in a low voice, "Olivia Bennett. The bell can lift you up. It can also send you crashing down." Olivia paused. Her profile was tense. She did not turn back. She only threw down a cold sentence. "Then wait and see." The sound of her heels was quick and steady as she walked straight toward the flashbulbs outside. Julian followed her, taking his position with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed it countless times. Ethan remained alone where he stood and looked through the glass at that blinding white light. Applause. Praise. Adoration. All of it continued. The listing was complete. So was the setup. Originally. After today. He had planned to keep retreating behind the scenes and pave the last few steps for her. Now, it seemed there was no need. If she truly wanted to reach into places she should not touch, then he would first watch and see exactly how far she dared to go. "Ms. Bennett, over here. Please look at the camera again." The reporter's microphone was almost shoved into her face. Flash after flash lit up the floor-to-ceiling glass at the end of the hallway until it turned pale. Olivia turned sideways. And the smile returned to her lips. As if the brief loss of control in the lounge had never happened. "The listing is only the first step," she said, taking the question in a measured voice. "Next, the company will further integrate around its core business. Efficiency, resources, and decision-making will all be improved. Ms. Bennett, the outside world has always been curious. After the listing, will there be new adjustments to internal authority and responsibility? There will be optimization." Olivia looked into the camera, her eyes growing brighter. For a public company, the most important things are clarity, stability, and unity. The market must be able to see who is responsible and who makes decisions. As soon as she said that, several executives beside her exchanged glances, and the smiles on their faces deepened. Ms. Bennett is right. Many things really should become more centralized from now on. When the company was still climbing, Complicated division of labor was unavoidable. But now that we've entered a new stage, of course everything should center on you. One sentence after another poured oil onto the fire. The heat in Olivia's chest burned higher and higher. The roar from the bell-ringing ceremony had not yet faded. And now these gazes, this admiration, these eager statements lifted her even higher. Suddenly, she felt that those so-called joint decisions in the past had all essentially been restraints on her. Without her going out front to negotiate. Without her handling public relations under pressure. Without her stabilizing investors, partners, and media relationships layer by layer. How could the company have reached today? As for Ethan Reed, he had indeed done many things. But no matter how much he had done, it was all behind the scenes. The one standing on stage was her. The one recognized by the market was her. After the bell rang today, the one everyone would remember was also her. Another reporter asked, "Ms. Bennett, what do you think was the most critical turning point in getting the company here?" Olivia paused for half a second. Her smile became even more composed. "It was that when I needed to make a decision most. I did not back down." As soon as she said it, a wave of agreement rose around her. An executive quickly said, "Yes." Ms. Bennett carried the company through the hardest moments. Another immediately followed. In the end, the market recognized Ms. Bennett's judgment. Listening to those words, Olivia tightened her fingers. In her heart, she felt unprecedented satisfaction. Vindication. Starting today, no one would ever again press the phrase "this still needs to go through Mr. Reed" down on her head. She had already reached this position. Why should she leave the last rope there, letting someone else pull her back at any time? Her gaze shifted, and she suddenly asked the executive, inside the company now, "Is there anyone else who can block my decisions?" Her voice was not loud, but the few people around her froze. The executive reacted quickly and immediately smiled. "Of course not in normal operations. It's just that some formal procedures still follow the previous structure." "What does previous structure mean? For example?" The executive lowered his voice. "At the level of officer of record filings, authorization, and external signing authority. Strictly speaking, there are still some procedures that have to pass through." The smile on Olivia's face faded slightly. The media was still pressing questions in front of her. But she no longer had any interest in standing there to display her glory. She returned the microphone. Left only a sentence. "Please refer to later company announcements." And turned back toward the VIP lounge. Julian followed almost immediately. As soon as the door closed, most of the noise outside was cut off. Only footsteps and the faint sounds of interviews in the distance remained. There was no one else in the lounge. The tea was still warm. Documents lay spread across the table. As if this gap had been deliberately left for this exact moment. Julian walked to her side and lowered his voice. "You heard that, didn't you?" Olivia did not look at him. She only removed her earrings and casually placed them on the table. "Heard what?" "They all say they'll follow you from now on. But as long as the officer of record filing isn't in your hands, no matter how glorious you look today, you're just guarding the door for someone else." The air went still. That sentence was more direct and more brutal than all the flattery earlier. Olivia turned and stared at him. "If you have something to say it directly." Julian smiled. But there was no trace of retreat in his eyes. "Why do you think Ethan Reed was so calm today?" "Because he knows that as long as that formal title remains, he hasn't really lost. He can step behind the scenes and let you stand in front. But one day, with one sentence, he can push you right back down. He doesn't have that power, doesn't he?" Julian stepped half a pace forward, keeping his voice low as he said each word clearly. "On the first day of a listing, what the market values most is stability. Why do you think he never fought you openly before? It wasn't generosity. It was because the most important things were still in his hands. The authorization chain, the officer of record filing, the internal habit of using him as the final fallback signer. Aren't all of those hooks he left behind? If you don't act first today, then when he recovers, you'll be the one whose authority gets taken first." Olivia's fingertips trembled. The excitement from earlier seemed to be lifted open by that one sentence, revealing the uneasiness underneath that she had never wanted to admit. Yes, Ethan Reed had been too calm. calm enough to make her uncomfortable. He was not the kind of man who would swallow this humiliation for nothing. But he had not stopped her. He had not made a scene. He had not even chased after her again. That could only mean one thing. He still had something in his hands powerful enough to reverse the situation. Olivia said coldly. If we change it, can it really lock the outcome in place? Julian looked at her. His gaze growing darker. At the very least, it closes the door first. If you don't change it today, you may not get another chance tomorrow. After the listing, every move will be watched. If you use today's spotlight to push it through, people will only see it as normal restructuring. Once the heat passes, it won't be this smooth. You want me to change the officer of record to you. It's not that I want it. Julian gave a low laugh. It's that this is the safest option right now. You're the public face. It's not suitable for you to have too many procedural fingerprints on this. I'll take the formal title. If something happens outside, it lands on me first. You just steer the ship. He made it sound as though he was taking the risk for her. But the pride he could not hide still leaked from the corners of his eyes. Olivia saw it. But she did not expose it immediately. Right now, she cared more about something else. If she did not cut off Ethan's final restraint, then all of her glory today would be like fire suspended in someone else's palm. She would not allow that. Call them in, she said. Julian's eyes brightened. Now. Right now. The small office area inside the lounge had not been cleared out yet. The computers were still on. And several procedural files were still pressed beside the printer. When the company's secretary was called in, sweat still dotted her forehead. The head of legal followed behind her and immediately sensed that something was wrong as soon as he entered. Olivia did not let them sit down. She spoke directly. Prepare the officer of record change documents. Do it immediately. The tablet in the secretary's hands nearly slipped. Now. The head of legal's expression also changed. Ms. Bennett, today is the first day of the listing. Starting this kind of change suddenly would have a huge impact. Under normal procedure, we would at least need internal confirmation first. Then a record of board-level opinions. And also, bypass the regular reporting process. Olivia interrupted. Do not alert Ethan Reed. The office fell silent at once. The head of legal moved his lips. In the end, he forced himself to remind her. If Mr. Reed pursues this afterward, the procedure will look very bad. And if the market notices, the public relations risk will be significant. Are you teaching me how to do my job? Olivia looked at him. Her voice already cold. I said I'll take responsibility. Right now. You only need to tell me whether it can be done. The secretary instinctively looked toward the head of legal. The head of legal swallowed. His entire back had gone tense. He clearly understood that there was a problem here. He also understood why Olivia had singled out do not alert Ethan Reed. But outside the door, the media had not yet dispersed. Today was the listing day. Everyone knew Olivia was at the height of her momentum. And Julian Hayes was standing beside her. He did not look like a mere bystander. He looked like someone waiting to take something over. The head of legal remained silent for a few seconds. Finally, he spoke. We can draft the documents first. But I need you to confirm who the new officer of record will be. Without even looking at Julian, Olivia said directly. Julian Hayes. The secretary's breath caught. Even Julian himself had not expected her to be so decisive. The surge of wild joy he had suppressed for so long almost appeared in his eyes on the spot. He forced it down and only said softly, Olivia. Think this through. I have. Olivia sat down in front of the computer and tapped the desk with her finger. Begin. The next dozen minutes were like a rushed and dangerous surgery to remove stitches. The head of legal pulled up the template first and quickly checked the existing registered information. The secretary stood beside him holding a laptop, syncing the internal electronic process. The printer hummed, spitting out page after page, the corners still carrying heat. This part needs authorization basis. Use current operational decision authority first. What about the record here? Write urgent temporary adjustment. Each sentence was spoken in a low voice. But the pace was tight and fast. Olivia reviewed the items one by one. The more she looked, the more she felt a thrill of control returning to her hands. The frustration she had felt outside seemed to be erased stroke by stroke. Hadn't Ethan Reed said the bell could make her fall? Then she would step on him and kick him out first. When the head of legal handed her the last page, his fingers were stiff. "Ms. Bennett, please confirm again. Once the electronic process is submitted, the system will retain a record. Let it." If Mr. Reed sighed. I said. "Stop bringing him up." Olivia picked up the pen and signed her name. Her movement was sharp and clean, without the slightest hesitation. After signing the paper copy, she sat back at the computer and completed the electronic confirmation under the guidance of the head of legal. The moment the page switched, the blue-white interface flashed in her pupils, like a lock being turned open. The company secretary stared at the screen, her voice dry. "New officer of record listed as Julian Hayes. The internal change request has been submitted, and the external sync materials have been generated." Julian stood behind Olivia and looked at that line. His fingertips tingled uncontrollably. It was done. From provocation to paper. It had taken only the time behind one closed door. He had waited so long for this moment. As long as this entry went through, it would not be so easy for Ethan Reed to reach back in. Olivia slowly leaned back in her chair. The breathing her chest finally came out. It was not relief. It was a near-burning satisfaction. Like a blade that had hung over her head for years had been snapped by her own hand. She looked up at the screen. The corners of her lips rose bit by bit. Her voice was light, yet more decisive than ever. "From this moment on, this company answers to me." Outside, an even louder wave of noise rose, as if a new round of interviews had begun. In the floor-to-ceiling glass, the blurry reflections of the few people in the lounge appeared, papers spread out, computer still glowing, the just submitted process lying quietly in the back end. The head of legal stood in place, his palms soaked in cold sweat. The company secretary did not dare lift her head. Julian looked at Olivia, and the smile in his eyes could no longer be suppressed. Olivia merely straightened her cuffs and stood again. Her expression was even calmer than when she had walked out for the interview earlier. She had personally trampled the final boundary. She believed that from this moment on, no one could cross over her and touch the core of this company. Just as Olivia lifted her foot to walk out, the floor-to-ceiling glass outside suddenly flashed. It was not a camera flash. It was the back-end sync system throwing an update notification onto the big screen at the other end of the hallway. The blue-white window flickered past, like someone had publicly lifted the cover off a document that had not even had time to cool. Several staff members nearby had been quietly checking the process. When their gazes swept over, their expressions froze for an instant. At the far end of the outer corridor, Ethan Reed's phone vibrated at the exact same second. He lowered his eyes and opened it. The page loaded quickly, almost giving no one time to prepare. Internal change record. Submission time. Sync node. Registered information. Each item was listed clearly on the screen. The final line drove into his vision like a nail. New officer of record, Julian Hayes. A draft of wind poured in from the end of the corridor, making the cuff of his shirt tremble slightly. Ethan stared at that line. His fingertip pressed against the edge of the screen until it turned white. The last trace of restraint on his face sank inch by inch. She had really changed it. This was not a test. Not a threat. Not a few words said after being stirred up by someone else. A record had been created. A trail had been left. She had even blocked her own way back. Someone beside him seemed to recognize the synced content and whispered something, then quickly stopped. The cheers in the exchange hall had not yet faded. Applause. Interviews. Microphones bumping together. Everything surged through a layer of glass. But by the time it reached here, it was only a hollow, muffled sound. Ethan stood still. His Adam's apple moved slowly. He had originally wanted to leave her one step. Even if she had pushed him away in front of so many people in the lounge. Even if Julian had already reached this far. He still wanted to see whether she had simply been blinded by the spotlight. Whether she could pull herself back before the matter became too big. Now it seemed he had overestimated her. He raised his hand and called Olivia directly. The phone rang twice. She answered fairly quickly. In the background, he could still hear the crisp sound of heels on the floor and reporters calling Ms. Bennett after her. Clearly, She was still walking toward the VIP corridor exit, with plenty of people around her. Even her breathing carried the sharpness of someone who had just climbed into power. When Ethan spoke, his voice was low, but colder than anything he had said earlier. "Olivia Bennet. You really dared to change it." The other end was quiet for half a second. It was as if she had pulled the phone from her ear to check the caller ID, then pressed it back again. When she spoke, there was already clear impatience in her tone. "What do you want by calling me now?" "What do I want?" Ethan stared at the public record on his screen and said each word slowly. "On the first day of the listing, you changed the officer of record. Who gave you the nerve?" The wind in the hallway grew heavier. He did not mention Julian. He did not mention the people in the lounge. He only pushed the word straight in front of her. "I'm giving you one last chance. Tell legal to withdraw it now. Stop the process and change it back immediately. I'll pretend this never happened." He spoke slowly. There was even room left in his words. Not because he was conceding, but because between him and her, there had ultimately been more than the positions, authority, and signing processes inside the company. After 7 years, many things he thought were rotten beyond saving still had at least a layer of dignity left. As long as she stopped now, he could preserve that layer of dignity. But from the other end came a faint cold laugh. "Pretend it never happened." Olivia sounded as if she had heard something absurd. Her steps did not stop. Her voice through the phone was hard and cold. "Ethan Reed. Do you still not understand what time it is?" Someone around her probably stepped away tactfully. The background noise receded, making her words land even more clearly. "The company is public now. Starting today. It is no longer yours alone to decide." Ethan's eyes turned completely cold. "So you changed the officer of record to Julian Hayes. Who I change it to is my decision." "Your decision." His voice sank deeper. "Do you know how this move will look outside? How much chaos it will cause inside? You're trading the first day of a listing for Julian Hayes. Are you insane?" "Enough." Olivia cut him off directly, her tone suddenly sharp. "Stop using these words to pressure me. How it looks outside. How chaotic it gets inside. At the end of the day, isn't this just because you can't accept it?" Ethan said nothing, but she seemed to ignite herself with that sentence. The emotion she had suppressed for so long rushed through the phone, and she did not even bother to hide it. "Since the bell rang, you've been watching me stand in front, watching everyone surround me, watching the market recognize me. Not you. Now that I've cleaned up the last process, you can't sit still." "Cleaned up," Ethan repeated softly, his voice like a blade scraping glass. "Olivia Bennet. You changed the company's officer of record to an outsider. You call that cleaning things up? Julian Hayes is not an outsider." She said it firmly. When those words fell, even the wind seemed to pause for a moment. The back of Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. One knuckle after another turned pale. He looked at the congratulatory listing poster still scrolling behind the glass. The last trace of warmth in his eyes was extinguished completely by that sentence. He did not lose his temper immediately. He only asked her, "So now you've made up your mind to stand against me? You're the one forcing me to stand there." Olivia said coldly, "You always think the company can't survive without you. You always think every key thing should be in your hands. But today, I've already stepped up. I won't let anyone use those formal hooks to pull me back again." "Anyone?" Ethan laughed once. The smile was chilling. "Am I included in that?" "You were included from the beginning." The sentence landed like a slap. Clean and solid. She did not hesitate. No explanation. No softening. Not even a polite sentence to leave him a way back. She directly placed him into the category of people she needed to get rid of. As if all the things they had carried together over the past 7 years, along with everything he had blocked for her before today, had been swept into the trash by one sentence. Ethan stood where he was. Only after a long while did he speak. "Olivia Bennet. I'll say it one last time. Stop now. Change it back. There's still time. The one out of time is you." She answered even faster, her voice cold as ice. "Ethan Reed. This company now answers to me. You have no right to interfere with my decisions." This time, she did not even leave him space to continue. With a soft click in the call, It sounded like a fingernail snapping a thread stretched to its limit. She hung up. The busy tone poured into his ear at once. One sound after another. Hollow and piercing. Ethan did not move. The phone was still against his ear. His eyes slowly closed once. When they opened again, there was no fluctuation left in them. He stared at the darkened call interface for 2 seconds. Then called again. This time, it rang only once before the automated female voice jumped in mechanically. The person you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable. Ethan lowered his gaze to the screen and opened the contact information. The number that had once been so familiar lay there silently. He called again. The tone did not even finish before it was cut off. She had blocked him. It was not a hang-up in anger. It was not a Cold War where she might call back later. She had cut him off completely. In front of everyone. At the same time. At the VIP corridor entrance. Olivia took the phone away from her ear. Without even looking at the screen for long. Her finger slid down. Tapped. And added the number to the blacklist. The action was smooth and clean. As if she had practiced it countless times in her mind. The company secretary stood half a step behind her. When she saw the screen flash through that operation, her face went pale. But she did not dare make a sound. The head of legal followed on the other side. The sweat at his temples had not dried. When his gaze swept over Olivia turning off the screen, his throat felt blocked with cotton. Even his breathing tight. Julian asked softly, "What did he say?" Olivia powered off her phone and handed it directly to the secretary without lifting her eyes. Some useless nonsense. Her tone was excessively indifferent. As if the call she had just hung up had not been from Ethan Reed, but an irrelevant spam call. Then she straightened her cuff, put on the calm expression she used before cameras again, and walked forward. "The media is still waiting," she said. "Don't let people laugh at us." Julian looked at her profile. The corners of his lips slowly lifted. And he followed. At the other end of the hallway, Ethan finally lowered the phone from his ear. The wind scattered a few strands of hair across his forehead. In the distance, the big screen in the hall was still rolling with red numbers from the first day of listing. Congratulatory messages scrolled one after another. Lively enough to make it seem as if this company truly had limitless prospects. Only the phone in his palm was hard and cold. Its screen reflecting his face, which now held no visible ripple at all. He did not call a third time. Some doors only needed to be knocked on twice. A third knock would only be self-humiliation. Ethan lowered his head and reviewed the officer of record change record again. Submission time. Approval node. Registration information. External sync status. He did not miss a single item. After reading it, his finger slid across the screen. Screenshot. Save. Lock screen. His movements were so calm they were almost cruel. A new wave of noise came from the end of the hallway. Olivia had probably been surrounded by the media again. People were calling Ms. Bennett. People were asking about post-listing management structure adjustments. Their voices came through the glass, blurred like a different performance that had nothing to do with him. Ethan lifted his eyes and looked toward that blinding light. There was no warmth left in his gaze. He had originally wanted to cover for her one last time. Now, there was no need. He picked up his phone. His thumb stopped at the top of the contacts list for a moment, then moved away and opened another group of numbers. Before calling, he said only one sentence in a low voice, light as if it had fallen into the wind. Yet every word was clear. "You chose this yourself." After saying that, he put away the phone and turned away from the floor-to-ceiling window. His back was straight. His steps did not hesitate at all. Behind him, the noise continued, like a banquet that had just begun. Only this time, the table was about to collapse. He turned and walked directly into the narrow internal corridor at the end of the outer hallway. A passage reserved only for staff. The heavy fire door closed behind him. And the applause, interviews, and camera shutters outside were instantly pressed into muffled noise. Only the monotonous hum of the central air conditioning moved forward along the metal ceiling. Ethan stopped and opened the synced record again. The screen was cold white. Submission time, first day of listing. Initiating authority, urgent temporary adjustment. New officer of record, Julian Hayes. Below it were several pre-processing records for changes to the authorization chain. though they had not fully taken effect yet. The path had already been cleared. It was not a sudden impulse. It was not an emotional signature. Someone beside her had sharpened the knife. And she had picked it up with her own hands, aiming it at the final buffer he had left for her. Ethan stared at those lines, his eyes darkening bit by bit. He had originally thought she was only eager to prove herself. Now he saw that she was not. She wanted to use this listing moment to erase him completely from the company, leaving not even a formal place for him. It was not that she did not understand the consequences. She simply did not care about the consequences. She only cared that the person standing under the spotlight today could only be her. She only cared whether her power would become more secure once Julian Hayes took that formal title. The phone screen reflected his face, cold as ice that had not melted. A few seconds later, his thumb moved slowly across the page, and he also took a screenshot of the authorization chain section and saved it to an encrypted album. After doing that, he looked toward the narrow window at the end of the corridor. Through it, he could still see a corner of the hall. Red words rolled across the electronic screen, congratulatory lines appearing one after another, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Affection, dignity, concession. He had given all of it. She had rejected it. Ethan's Adam's apple moved slightly. He said in a low voice, "Fine. Then we'll do it your way." His voice was not loud. It was very calm. But in the empty corridor, it sounded like something had been cut off completely. After saying that, he placed a direct line call. The other side picked up almost immediately after one ring. "Mr. Reed." It was Marcus Chase. No greeting. No questions. Only a clean response, tense in its efficiency. Ethan leaned against the cold wall. His gaze still rested on the exaggerated red glow outside the window. His first sentence had nothing to do with Olivia. "Do the capital side rights still sit under my name?" The other end went quiet for a moment, as if something was being checked at the same time. Soon, Marcus's voice returned. Clean. Stable. Without the slightest hesitation. "Yes. All Capital Communications recognize only you." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That sentence was like the final nail, pinning the answer firmly in place. She thought changing the officer of record and the authorization chain, using the light of the listing, would let her hollow him out. But she had no idea that what had truly supported this company as it climbed step by step had never been those titles placed on the table. It was money. It was credit. It was guarantees. It was the holes he had pressed down at each critical point, again and again. And it was the fact that the capital side recognized him, not anyone else. The air conditioning wind blew down the corridor, carrying a cold smell mixed with metal and disinfectant. Ethan stood there, terrifyingly calm. Even his breathing showed no fluctuation. "Then begin," he said. Marcus did not answer immediately, as if waiting for a more specific order. Ethan lifted a hand and loosened his collar. His movement was slow, but his words grew colder one by one. "Pull out all partner capital under my control. All of it," he added. "Do not leave a single opening." On the other end came a faint tapping sound, as if Marcus had already begun recording the instructions. Ethan continued. His pace was not fast, but every word landed with weight. "Existing investment cooperation. Stop it. Growth plans. Stop them. Bridge funding. Stop it. All credit support. Terminate immediately. Whatever needs to be returned. Return it. Whatever needs to be withdrawn. Withdraw it. Any equity exit that can proceed. Use the fastest route." At this point, he paused. His gaze swept past the crowd outside still holding up microphones, and the corner of his lips pulled into a faint cold line. "Starting now. This company no longer enjoys any endorsement from me." The recording sound on the other end paused. When Marcus spoke this time, his voice was lower and more serious, confirming full execution, with no buffer left for Olivia Bennett. "Correct. Yes. No explanations to anyone who asks. Yes. Including her personally." The last trace of movement in Ethan's eyes disappeared. Especially her. The air seemed to sink under those two words. At the far end of the corridor, someone pushed the door open, quickly sensed something was wrong, stopped, and withdrew. The fire door rebounded carefully with a dull thud. Ethan did not even lift his eyelids. He continued bringing the blade down. Notify all partners. They do not need to report to her. They do not need to communicate with her. Anyone who dares delay will be removed from my partner list as well. Anyone who dares bet on both sides will never touch my projects again. Marcus answered. Understood. But Ethan did not stop. Also, by tonight, pull together a complete list of all support I've given this company over the years. Funds, guarantees, channels, pre-listing bridge loans, introductions to capital. Every record. Don't miss one. I want her to know exactly who built the platform she's standing on. Beam by beam. This was not venting. Nor was it a threat. It was a reckoning. Marcus listened quickly and answered even faster. The materials are all in the central archive. I can pull them directly. The capital contact mechanism is also ready. We can complete unified notification within 3 minutes. Ethan's gaze stopped. 3 minutes. Yes. Marcus answered without any empty confidence. To prepare for sudden risks during the listing window. All core institutions were placed under the same communication mechanism. Messaging, nodes, and feedback chains are all connected. As long as you approve it, the notification will go out simultaneously, giving no one time to wait and watch alone. Ethan was silent for 2 seconds. Then he gave a soft It was very light. Yet it carried more weight than any sentence. This company had not reached today by relying on someone saying a few pretty words in front of cameras. The things that truly held up the structure were things Olivia likely still had not seen clearly. She thought she was consolidating power in the spotlight. In reality, she was standing at the edge of a cliff and had personally kicked away the last load-bearing board. On the other end, Marcus had already begun repeating the execution language. Unified notification will include withdrawal of capital, termination of credit support, equity exit, cancellation of follow-up support, no negotiation, no delays, no third-party relay, final position recognized only under your personal authorization. What reason do we give externally? Marcus paused for a second, as if considering the wording. Ethan did not rush him. He simply waited quietly. The air conditioning kept blowing in the corridor. The fire door had blocked out every trace of the outside world's noise. For the external reason, Marcus finally said, "Will write, strategic direction adjustment due to irreconcilable differences in the company's internal governance structure." That language won't directly name Olivia Bennett. But it will let everyone who receives the notice understand immediately where the problem is. Ethan gave a soft Marcus continued. The trigger mechanism has been set. The first batch of notices will go out within 3 minutes, covering 6 core capital backers. The second batch will cover all related parties within 1 hour. All exit procedures will complete internal preliminary signing tonight and be synced to the exchange filing system before market open tomorrow morning. Before market open? Ethan asked. Yes. Marcus's voice was as stable as a precisely running machine. Olivia Bennett's side is still receiving media right now. By the time she reacts, the information will already be synced to every relevant platform. Even if she wants to suppress it, she won't be able to. Ethan said nothing more. He lowered his eyes and looked at the screenshots on the screen. Suddenly, everything felt absurd. 7 years. More than 700 days and nights. Countless all-nighters. Countless risks he had pressed down. Countless dirty and exhausting matters he had blocked for her. And in the end, he received a blacklist and a change request with Julian Hayes filled into the officer of record field. Execute. He hung up. The corridor grew quiet again. Ethan put the phone back into his pocket and walked a few steps toward the fire door. Then stopped and turned his head toward the window. The red numbers were still jumping. The first day listing gain had already broken 15%. In the hall, someone was raising champagne in celebration. Olivia was probably standing in the very center, surrounded by flashbulbs. He did not look a second time. He pushed the door open and walked out. 3 minutes. From the moment Ethan hung up, the capital market was as if a silent bomb had been dropped into it. When the first call reached the office of the president of Anchor Capital, the man was watching a replay of the listing live stream. Anchor Capital had been the largest institutional shareholder in the company's final pre-listing financing round, with a stake of more than 12%. It was the thickest pillar supporting the entire structure. His secretary knocked and came in, handing over the call record with only one sentence. Urgent notice from Ethan Reed's side. The president of Anchor Capital took the paper. His gaze moved from the first line to the last. And within seconds, his face went from relaxed to iron gray. He turned off the television directly and called back to confirm. The other side gave only 3 words. Full exit. Fast. The second call went to Summit Peak Capital. Same content. Same wording. Same refusal to leave any room. The head of Summit Peak was having lunch with people from other investment banks. After hearing the call, he said nothing, put down his wine glass, and left the table, leaving everyone staring at each other. Third call. Fourth call. Fifth call. The news spread like spilled mercury, starting with the 6 core capital backers. It moved along the communication chain that had long been opened, reaching all capital side parties connected to the company within just 1 hour. No one asked why. Everyone who received the notice did the same thing: confirm their positions, evaluate risk exposure, then begin moving. Olivia was still in the banquet hall. The listing celebration was held on the top floor of a 5-star hotel next to the exchange. The entire floor had been reserved. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the city's night skyline. On stage, the band played light jazz. Dozens of tables were filled with guests raising glasses. And every face wore a smile. She sat at the main table. Julian was on her left. Several industry leaders were on her right. After several rounds of drinks, her face was faintly flushed. And her mood could not have been better. The media interviews were over. The listing ceremony had ended perfectly. The market gain had held steady. The officer of record filing and authorization chain had also been changed. Everything was moving along the path she had imagined. Ms. Bennett, a toast to you. A partner representative beside her stood with a glass and a full smile. The company could reach today entirely because of your courage. Olivia smiled, raised her glass, and lightly clinked it with his. She could no longer remember how many drinks she had had today. But every glass reminded her of one thing. She had won. Ethan Reed probably already knew about the officer of record change by now. So what? The deal was done. Could he still overturn the sky? Julian leaned closer and lowered his voice. I've already had the team arrange the follow-up roadshow schedule. First one next Monday. Second one Thursday. Does that work for you? Olivia turned to look at him, her gaze carrying a little appraisal. Julian was dressed impeccably today in a dark gray suit, white shirt, perfectly knotted tie, and even newly changed cuff links. From the bell ringing that morning until now, he had remained by her side, feeding lines, reminding her, positioning, coordinating. Every detail had been flawless. If it had been someone else, Olivia might have thought the person was excessively attentive. But Julian was different. From the beginning, he had stood on her side. He thought for her, planned for her, and even for something as sensitive as the officer of record title, he was willing to take that layer of risk for her. Fine. She nodded. You oversee the roadshow. You don't have to ask me about everything. A trace of satisfaction flashed through Julian's eyes. But nothing showed on his face. He only smiled and raised his glass. Don't worry. It's all arranged. The banquet was in full swing when Olivia's phone suddenly vibrated. She looked down. It was a message from the company secretary. There was only one line. Ms. Bennett, several institutions called asking about something. Rather sudden. Olivia frowned slightly. What did rather sudden mean? Just as she was about to reply, the phone vibrated again. This time, it was the head of legal. The message was shorter, but the tone was clearly wrong. Anchor Capital is reviewing exit clauses. Exit clauses. Olivia's heart dropped. Anchor Capital was the largest institutional shareholder. She knew exactly what it meant for them to review exit clauses on the first day of listing. But she had just signed the officer of record change that morning. And in the afternoon the capital side was already moving. That was too coincidental. She put down her glass, rose from the table, and walked out to the terrace outside the banquet hall. The night wind scattered some of the heat on her face. Clearing her head, she called the company secretary directly. What's going on? The secretary's voice on the other end was tight. Ms. Bennett, 15 minutes ago. Anchor Capital. Summit Peak Capital. Horizon Investment. Founders Bridge Capital. 6 core capital backers all sent inquiries. They're all asking the same thing, whether there is a major internal governance dispute within the company. And their tone is urgent. One of them even asked directly whether we have a payment coverage plan prepared. Coverage. Olivia's voice sank. What coverage? It's just. The secretary was clearly flipping through papers. The rustling audible through the phone. If the backers exit in a concentrated way, our cash liquidity won't hold. The listing proceeds haven't arrived yet. And the gap between the credit line and the existing capital shortfall is too large. Olivia's hand tightened around the phone. Her mind turned rapidly. The first thought that surfaced was impossible. On the day of listing, how could the capital backers act at the same time? That made no sense. Unless someone had instructed them. Someone had instructed them. Those words were like ice sliding down her spine. Ethan Reed. He had stood in the exchange hall that morning and said, "Let's see where the stock closes today." And by afternoon, he had already moved. But how could he have done it? He did know about the officer of record change. But what did that have to do with the capital side? He had not handled capital matters for a long time. No. The defensive wall in Olivia's mind suddenly cracked open. She abruptly remembered something. At the end of last year, during the company's final financing round before the listing, several institutions had disagreed over valuation. Ethan had flown to 3 cities alone and negotiated every detail. At the time, she had been unable to go for health reasons. So he had handled the entire process. Since then, the contact methods and key decision nodes of those institutions had bypassed her office. She had thought that was temporary. She had thought that after the listing, all relationships would naturally transition back into her hands. She had thought it was a small thing. Reality slapped her hard across the face. The capital relationships were still gripped in Ethan Reed's hands. As soon as that thought appeared, the sweat on Olivia's back turned cold. She immediately searched her contacts for the president of Anchor Capital. Her finger trembled slightly when she tapped the screen. But after 6 rings, the call was rejected. She called Summit Peak Capital. No answer. Horizon Investment went straight to voicemail. Founders Bridge Capital had a secretary answer and say, "The person in charge is in a meeting." In a meeting? What meeting at 9 o'clock at night? Olivia stood on the terrace. The night wind whipping the hem of her dress. Her palms were slick with sweat. The slight buzz from the alcohol had completely disappeared, replaced by a cold panic rising from her stomach. She turned her head and looked into the banquet hall. Julian was still at the main table, smiling and talking with people, as if nothing had happened. But suddenly, she felt that his smile was somewhat far away from her. She was about to go back in when her phone vibrated again. This time, it was an encrypted message from the CFO. Only a few words and numbers. "Ms. Bennett, we just received formal written notices from the 6 capital backers. All have triggered exit clauses. At the same time, all credit lines have been temporarily frozen." Olivia stared at that message as if someone had punched her in the chest. All triggered. Temporarily frozen. Those words were like blades stabbing into her at once. She froze for 2 seconds. Then abruptly pushed open the terrace door and strode back into the banquet hall. Her heel struck the marble floor in rapid, piercing sounds. Many people turned to look. Julian was the first to notice something wrong with her expression. His smile vanished. And he stood to meet her. What happened? Olivia did not look at him. She walked straight past him to the CFO's table. The CFO was in his 40s and had worked in finance for more than 10 years. She had never seen him show this kind of expression in a formal setting. Pale lips. Sweat all over his temples. Even his tie pulled crooked. "Show me the documents," Olivia said, forcing her voice down. The CFO handed her the tablet. On the screen lay 6 nearly identical written notices. All issued between 6 and 7 that afternoon. Uniform wording. Consistent position. No room for negotiation. All exit clauses triggered. Credit frozen. Follow-up support terminated. Olivia's finger slid across the screen. With every page she turned, her face paled further. Finally, she reached the last page and saw a sentence she had not noticed before. This notice provides no negotiation window, accepts no third-party relay, and recognizes final position only under authorization from Mr. Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed. The 3 words sat clearly at the bottom, like a brand heated red-hot. Olivia's fingers trembled around the tablet. She abruptly lifted her head and looked around. The banquet hall held more than 100 smiling faces. But in her eyes, every smile suddenly changed flavor. It was as if beneath every smiling face hid the same question. Are you finished? The CFO lowered his voice. Ms. Bennett, we have to handle this immediately. With 6 institutions exiting at once, the liquidity and credit gap on our books is at least $55 million. $55 million. The number was like a bucket of ice water poured from head to toe. Olivia finally turned and looked at Julian. She thought he would be shocked, anxious, and immediately think of a solution for her. But Julian stood 2 steps away, wearing an expression she had never seen before. It was not panic. It was not worry. It was a faint, almost invisible weighing. As if he were calculating how far this ship had sunk and whether he should jump early or wait a little longer. At that moment, Olivia for the first time felt that perhaps she had made some mistakes. At 11 that night, the news began to leak. There are never real secrets in the capital market. 6 core capital backers triggering exit clauses on the same day and all credit lines freezing. This combination would make even a large public company shake. A few finance accounts with good sources were the first to smell blood. Before midnight, they posted breaking items with headlines more shocking than the last. Capital backers retreat collectively on first listing day, major company faces stunning crisis. $55 million in frozen credit, who pays the bill? Officer of record mystery, internal power struggle comes to light. At 1 a.m, Olivia's phone exploded. Media calls, partner inquiries, investor challenges. They poured in one after another. She had no time to breathe. The company secretary and public relations team were called back to the office overnight. The conference room lights blazed. Keyboard sounds and ringing phones mixed together. The air was filled with anxiety. Ms. Bennett, several media outlets have already obtained internal screenshots of the officer of record change. The PR director rushed in holding a phone. His voice hoarse. They're also investigating the connection between the change time and the listing time. If they dig out that it was changed on listing day, public opinion will explode. Olivia sat at the head of the conference table without a trace of color in her face. A pile of documents lay spread before her: capital exits, credit freezes, partner suspensions. Every page reminded her of one thing. From the moment she had stood on stage and rung the bell that morning, only a thin layer of ice had remained beneath her feet, and she had personally stepped through it. Julian sat diagonally across from her. Since earlier, he had been looking at his phone with furrowed brows. No one knew what he was thinking. Olivia finally could not hold back. "What are you looking at?" Julian looked up. The smile on his face had changed into another kind. Concern, worry, and exactly the right amount of nervousness. "I'm contacting some institutional investors I know to see if we can arrange a short-term bridge loan," he said sincerely. "Olivia, don't panic. There's still a turn." Olivia stared at him for 2 seconds and said nothing. She kept feeling that something was wrong, but her mind was too chaotic to sort it out. A $55 million gap. Officer of record change exposed on the first day of listing. Collective exit by capital backers. Credit freeze. Media pursuit from every side. So many things pressed down at once that she had no room to take a breath. The PR director spoke again. "Ms. Bennett, we need an external statement now. The message must be unified. We can't let people feel there's an internal problem." "Right." Julian immediately picked up the thread. The statement should say, "Due to post-listing strategic adjustment, the continuation format of certain capital partners has changed. This is a normal commercial arrangement. First, steer public focus away from the officer of record change." The PR director looked at Julian, then at Olivia, waiting for her decision. Olivia opened her mouth and realized her throat was dry and painful. It felt as if cotton had been stuffed into it. After a long while, she squeezed out one sentence. "Draft it that way first. Let me see it before it goes out." The conference room continued spiraling into chaos. Another call came in. This time it was the roadshow team. 3 institutions that had already confirmed attendance for next Monday's roadshow had just cancelled at the same time. Their reason was simple. Internal assessment changed. Contact temporarily suspended. From bell ringing to collapse. Less than 12 hours had passed. At the same time, Ethan sat on the balcony of his apartment with a cup of tea that had gone cold. On the coffee table in front of him lay the execution progress report Marcus had sent. All exit actions had completed internal preliminary signing and would be officially pushed to the exchange filing system at 8 the next morning. The capital side had reacted even faster than expected. All 6 institutions cooperated. Not one delayed or tried to bargain. The credit banks had also issued written confirmations. The freeze process had begun. And all subsequent lending was terminated. Everything was moving according to plan. His phone screen lit up. Marcus sent a message. Olivia Bennett's side is drafting a statement and wants to use strategic adjustment as the message. Also, Julian Hayes is privately contacting several small institutions to try to arrange bridge funds. Ethan glanced at it and casually typed one word. Let. Marcus replied quickly. Understood. Ethan put down the phone, lifted the cold tea, and took a sip. His gaze rested on the distant city nightscape. Thousands of lights burned. But not one belonged to him. The successful listing should have been something worth celebrating. But now he sat here with a heart as empty as if something had been carved out of it. 7 years. He had accompanied her from a tiny studio to today. From having only a few tens of thousands left in the account to ringing the bell as a public company. From holding meetings on the balcony of an apartment because they could not afford an office to standing in the center of flashbulbs in an exchange hall. Every hurdle had been crossed by 2 people together. But the moment she stood high, the first person she wanted to kick away was him. Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered a night last winter when she had a high fever. He drove her to the hospital through heavy snow. Traffic was blocked for 3 hours. And he sat beside her in the car, talking to her until dawn. At that time, she had leaned on his shoulder and murmured in a daze. As long as you're here, I'm not afraid. He also remembered when she closed her first major deal. She had hugged him and cried until her makeup ran, saying, Ethan, I finally didn't let you down. Scene after scene passed through his mind. In the end, they all stopped on the call record from that afternoon. He called twice. She blocked him. He gave her one last chance. She placed him in the category of people she needed to break free from. Ethan opened his eyes. His gaze returned to calm. Affection was something that could be given regardless of cost. It could also be withdrawn cleanly. He finished the cold tea, got up, went back inside, and opened his computer to organize the materials Marcus had sent. It was a complete list of all support he had given the company over the years: capital injections, guarantee endorsements, bridge loans, introductions to investors, key negotiations, risk backstops. Each item was attached with time, amount, and records. Everything was clear. He wanted her to see it. He wanted her to read it one line at a time and understand exactly how many load-bearing pillars the man she thought she could kick away at will had left inside this company. At 3 in the morning, Olivia finally walked out of the conference room. The hallway outside was silent, with only a few emergency lights casting dim yellow light. She walked toward her office in heels, her steps much heavier than during the day. No one followed her. Even Julian had left early under the excuse of contacting funding. She pushed open the office door. A lamp was still on inside. On the desk lay the officer of record change document she had signed during the day. The paper corners seemed to still carry a trace of warmth. But when she looked at the lines, they only hurt her eyes. The name Julian Hayes lay neatly in the officer of record field, like a newly driven nail. Olivia sat down and stared at the document for a long time. Suddenly, she remembered what Ethan had said that morning. The bell can lift you up. It can also send you crashing down. At the time, she had only found it laughable. She thought he was jealous and could not accept losing. But now, sitting here facing a $55 million gap and a public opinion crisis about to collapse, that sentence suddenly felt like a prophecy. She wanted to call him. After unlocking her phone, She found Ethan Reed's name still sitting in her contacts. But during the day, she had personally blocked him. With trembling hands, she removed him from the blacklist and dialed the number. It rang 5 times. Then it went to voicemail. She called again. Still voicemail. The 3rd time, the system directly said, "The person you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable." Olivia held the phone, her entire body stiff in the chair. Suddenly, she remembered that after hanging up on him that afternoon, she had directly blocked the number. At the time, she thought that was her final victory, a symbol that she had completely seized the initiative. But now, it had turned around on her. She could no longer reach him. The wheel had turned faster than she ever imagined. Olivia threw the phone onto the desk and covered her face with both hands. The office was quiet enough that she could hear her own breathing. Every breath was heavy and bitter. She no longer knew what to do next. When the market opened tomorrow, the news would certainly have spread everywhere. The stock price would fall. The market would panic. Partners would wait and watch. She did not have enough money to support the scene. Nor did she have enough relationships to stabilize the situation. Julian kept saying he would help her arrange bridge funds. But how much money could those small institutions he knew provide? A $55 million gap. Could he fill it with his life? She finally had to admit one thing. All of her confidence, arrogance, and invincibility during the day had been built on a foundation she had never actually seen clearly. She thought she had propped up the company, but the real spine holding it up had been torn out by her own hands. And now, that person no longer answered her calls. 8 in the morning. 15 minutes before market open. On the exchange display, the company's stock began sliding from the previous closing price. The moment the market opened, sell orders poured out like an avalanche. Green numbers kept jumping, and the decline broke 5% within 3 minutes. Real-time media alerts popped up one after another. Each asked the same question. What happened? A financial channel host spoke rapidly into the camera. Just now, our reporters learned that on its very first day of listing, the company suffered a collective exit by 6 core capital backers and a full-line credit freeze. Market panic is spreading rapidly. According to informed sources, this incident may be related to major internal personnel changes within the company. The real-time stock price rolled along the bottom of the screen. The green numbers kept falling. 7%, 9%, 11%. Inside the company's headquarters, the entire management team had gone insane. The PR team's phones were being blown up. More than a dozen people packed the conference room, and every single one was asking the same question. Where is Ms. Bennett? Olivia sat in her office. On the computer screen before her, rows of horrifying numbers kept jumping. She had not slept all night. Dark shadows sat under her eyes. Her makeup had long been ruined. Several strands of hair had fallen loose. She looked as if her spirit had been drained away. She stared fixedly at the stock curve, watching it plunge into free fall from the first second of market open, setting a new low every second. Someone knocked and entered. It was the CFO. His face looked even worse than the night before. He held a new summary sheet, and even his voice was shaking. Ms. Bennett, aside from the 6 core capital backers, 7 more small and mid-sized institutions issued reduction intentions this morning. Also, 2 partner banks just notified us that our credit extension applications have been put on hold. Olivia did not turn around. She only looked at the stock price on the screen and suddenly asked softly, "Where is Ethan Reed today?" The CFO froze for a second, then hesitated. "I'm not sure. After last night, no one has been able to reach him." Olivia's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. Suddenly, she stood, grabbed her jacket, and walked out. The CFO called after her, but she ignored him. She had to see Ethan Reed. She had to. She could apologize. She could back down. She could change the officer of record back. Anything. As long as he stopped. As long as he made the capital come back. As long as he did not dismantle this company from within. But when she reached the elevator, Julian hurried over from the other end of the hallway and blocked her path. "Olivia. Where are you going?" Olivia looked at the man in front of her and suddenly felt that his face was terrifyingly unfamiliar. Yesterday, he had still been standing beside her. taking the officer of record title for her, planning how to centralize power for her, pushing Ethan Reed out for her. But now that the company had run into trouble, what had he done? He had privately contacted small institutions for bridge funding. He had spent an entire night doing it and had not obtained a single dollar. He had sat in the conference room all night and said only two things from beginning to end. Don't panic. There's still a turn. But where was the turn? Move. Olivia said coldly. Julian grabbed her arm and lowered his voice. If you go to him now, you're handing him the initiative. He's waiting for you to bow your head. You can't lower it. The stock price falling a little doesn't matter. It can stabilize later. But once you bow, the whole situation can never be reversed. Olivia stared at him. She remembered every sentence he had said yesterday. If authority isn't centralized, outsiders will think the company is chaotic. If the officer of record filing isn't in your hands, you're just guarding the door for someone else. Act first. Don't wait for him to recover. Every sentence had sounded like it was for her own good. But every road, when followed to the end, led to the same result. She had been isolated, hollowed out, abandoned by capital. And him. He had obtained the officer of record identity. Though now that title was hotter than a burning potato. Suddenly, she laughed. The laugh was cold and bitter. Julian Hayes. Yesterday you told me to change the officer of record and said you could carry the risk for me. Now the risk is here. Have you carried it? Julian's expression changed slightly. But he quickly recovered. His tone still gentle. Olivia. Calm down. I'm trying to help you arrange bridge funds right now. Aren't I? You have to give me some time. Time. Olivia shook off his hand. Yesterday. Weren't you the one who said, if we don't change it today, there may be no chance tomorrow? Now I changed it. The stock price has fallen. And you're telling me to give you some time. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. Olivia walked in and pressed the button for the lobby. Just before the doors closed, she saw Julian standing in the hallway. The expression on his face finally cracking to reveal a trace of anxiety and unease. But that no longer mattered. Ethan was sitting in a coffee shop near the company. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warm and soft, forming a stark contrast with his expression. An Americano sat before him, already mostly finished. His phone lay on the table, screen glowing as Marcus sent real-time stock updates line by line. Down 15%. Faster than expected. Marcus sent one final message. She left the company. She's probably coming to find you. Ethan read it, turned the phone face down on the table, and lifted his coffee for a sip. Outside the window, traffic flowed normally. Nothing special seemed to be happening. But he knew that inside one of those cars sat Olivia Bennett. On her way toward him. He waited 7 minutes. When his coffee was almost finished, the cafe door was pushed open, and a gust of wind swept in. Olivia stood at the entrance, wearing the same suit jacket from yesterday. Her hair was somewhat messy, and her face was so haggard she looked like a different person. Her gaze swept around the room and finally locked on him. The two looked at each other across half the cafe. Ethan put down his cup. He did not stand. He did not speak. Olivia walked over in heels. Her steps were much slower than usual. When she reached his table, she stopped and looked down at him from above. But that posture lasted only 2 seconds before she sat down across from him, placing both hands on the table and twisting her fingers together. There were not many people in the cafe. A few customers glanced over curiously, then lowered their heads and returned to their own business. Olivia spoke. Her voice was terribly hoarse. You won. Ethan looked at her calmly, his face expressionless. Won what? Olivia took a deep breath, as if swallowing the last of her pride. You made the capital backers exit. You froze the credit lines. The stock price falling like this. It's all because of you. She stared into his eyes. Do you want me to beg? Want me to admit defeat? I'm here now. Are you satisfied? Ethan put down his cup and leaned forward slightly. His voice was not loud, but every word was clear. Olivia Bennett. Do you think I did all this just to make you beg me? Olivia bit her lip and said nothing. Ethan reached under the table and pulled out a document envelope, then pushed it toward her. The craft envelope was sealed, thick with papers inside. Open it. Olivia hesitated. Then reached out. Opened the seal. And pulled out the contents. The first page was a cash flow list starting 7 years ago. Every item was listed clearly: capital injections, guarantee amounts, bridge loans, investor introductions. Behind it were copies of agreements. Some bore her signature, some his. But the guarantor field always carried his name. Further back were risk backstop records. Each mess he had carried for the company marked with time, amount, and consequence. A thick stack. Like a ledger of 7 years. Olivia turned the pages one by one. Her fingers grew stiffer and stiffer. She saw the financing from last year that she had thought she negotiated herself. Attached below it were his negotiation notes: 3 cities, 7 meetings, 3 all-nighters. She saw the bridge funding from the most dangerous time the year before. Money he had secured over the phone while running a high fever. The records below even included a doctor's sick note from the hospital. She saw that behind every decision she had approved, there was a risk assessment report prepared by him. Finally, she finished turning through it. The entire stack lay spread across the table like a silent trial. Ethan looked at her. His voice was flat. "Didn't you always want to know how the company really got to today? This is the answer." Olivia's lips moved several times. She wanted to say something, but her throat felt blocked. She looked at the man across from her and suddenly realized that his eyes had changed. The restrained calm from yesterday, the kind that still left room, had turned into complete unfamiliarity today. It was as if he were looking at someone who no longer mattered. "I gave you one last chance yesterday," Ethan said. "As long as you stopped and withdrew the process. I could have pretended nothing happened. But you didn't. Not only did you not stop, you blocked me." Olivia finally forced out a voice. "I was wrong." When those 3 words came out of her mouth, even she found them unfamiliar. When was the last time she had said "I was wrong" to anyone? So long ago that she could no longer remember. Ethan heard it, but did not react. He only looked at her, like he was looking at a figure already walking away. Too late. Olivia seemed burned by those words. She suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Ethan Reed, you raised this company with your own hands. Can you really bear to watch it collapse like this? Bring the capital back. Unfreeze the credit lines. I can change the officer of record back. I can restore everything. I'll agree to anything." Ethan lowered his gaze to her hand clutching his wrist, then lifted his eyes to her face again. He knew those hands too well. Over 7 years. He had held them countless times. They had walked the longest nights side by side. But now, the way that hand grabbed him was like a drowning person clutching the last piece of driftwood, gripping with all her strength and refusing to let go. Olivia Bennett. Slowly, finger by finger, he pried her hand off his wrist. "When you stood on stage yesterday ringing the bell, did you ever think you'd come begging me? When you blocked me, did you ever think you'd come looking for me again?" Her hand was pried away and hung in the air. It stayed stiff for a long while before slowly falling back to the table. She looked at him, and her eyes gradually reddened. She never cried in front of people. But now, tears rose uncontrollably and slid down her cheeks, dripping onto the tabletop. She lifted a hand to wipe them away. But the more she wiped, the more they came. Ethan turned his gaze away and looked out the window. Sunlight came in, laying a faint golden layer over the side of his face. He did not turn back to look at her. "Keep those documents," he said. "You choose how the road goes from here. But I won't cover anything for this company again." After saying that, he stood, picked up his coat, went around the table, and walked toward the door. Olivia remained seated, watching his back move farther and farther away. The cafe door opened. The doorbell rang once. He left. Sunlight poured in from outside, then was cut off again as the door closed. Olivia sat alone in the empty seat. Before her lay the thick stack of materials. Her tears dropped one by one onto the paper, blurring one line of text into a smear of ink. After returning from the cafe, Olivia became like a different person. She no longer made frantic calls, no longer looked everywhere for connections to borrow money, no longer tried to save the stock price. She only locked herself in her office and read that stack of documents again and again, page by page, line by line. Every page she turned was like swallowing a shard of broken glass. 7 years. She had walked beside him for 7 years. But only today did she truly see how many times he had stood in front to block the wind while she stood behind him and picked the fruit. She had thought all of it was her own ability. She had thought that standing in front, saying a few words, showing her face a few times meant the credit was hers. But in reality, the 4 legs that truly held up the table had all been nailed in by him alone. Olivia closed the materials and leaned back in her chair. Eyes shut. There were still tear tracks at the corners of her eyes. But they had dried. Suddenly, she felt very clear-headed. Clearer than she had ever been. The phone rang. The company secretary's voice came through. Even more panicked than yesterday. Ms. Bennett, Julian Hayes. Julian Hayes just processed his resignation. Olivia opened her eyes. What? He just went to HR, submitted his resignation. And left directly. The officer of record change is still in process. Once he resigns, the new officer can't complete registration. The company will fall into an officer of record vacancy. Olivia held the phone, listening to the secretary urgently ask what they should do. But there was only one thought left in her mind. Julian Hayes had run. The man who had stood beside her yesterday, repeatedly saying he would carry the risk for her, had seen the stock price collapse, capital flee, and credit freeze. And the first thing he chose was not to stay and help her. He chose to extract himself from this sinking ship. The officer of record change was still underway. Once he resigned, it would get completely stuck. The company would enter a state with no registered officer of record. External contracts, tax filings, legal procedures. Everything would be paralyzed. He was ruthless. Far more ruthless than she was. He had used the heat of the first listing day. Used her eagerness to prove herself. Used the widening crack between her and Ethan Reed. Pushed everything to an irreversible point. Then jumped ship first when disaster arrived. Olivia slowly straightened. Her expression changed from confusion, collapse, and despair into a strange calm. She hung up on the secretary and called the head of legal. You know about Julian Hayes resigning? The head of legal's voice was tight. I know. Ms. Bennett, the officer of record change is now stuck halfway. The new officer has resigned. And the original change has not been completed. During this period, the company will be in a state of... I know. Olivia interrupted. I'm asking you. Since Julian Hayes resigned today, under employment law and the company's bylaws, can he still complete the officer of record registration? The head of legal was silent for 5 seconds. Then he said, no. After the change request is submitted, the new officer must complete an in-person signing with the registration authority for it to officially take effect. Since he resigned today, that signing can no longer proceed. The change process becomes invalid. Olivia closed her eyes. Suddenly, she laughed once. The laugh was short, carrying a strange release. Ethan Reed had guessed correctly. Julian Hayes had never come to help her. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, drawn by the smell of blood. The moment the meat was torn open, he turned and ran. There's one more thing, the head of legal said hesitantly. If Julian Hayes spreads the officer of record change information in some way, the company could face an even more serious market credibility crisis. Olivia's eyes sharpened. Does he have the nerve? Hard to say. He should have kept screenshots showing the change request submission. If he privately gives them to the media. Olivia tightened her grip on the phone. She knew Julian Hayes too well. He always handled things flawlessly and would definitely leave himself a way out before acting. He must have screenshots. Would he release them? Perhaps. If he sold the officer of record change screenshots to the media, the direction of public opinion would become internal power grab on listing day. Reckless officer of record change. Management split. That would be even more fatal than the capital exits. Watch him. Olivia said. If he releases anything, we issue a legal letter immediately. But right now, there is something more important. The head of legal asked. What? Olivia took a deep breath. She stood and walked to the window, looking at the gray sky outside. Terminate the original officer of record change process completely. Then put Ethan Reed's name back in. The other end was silent for several seconds. The head of legal seemed shaken by the sentence. It took him a while to find his voice. "Ms. Bennet, what if Mr. Reed's side refuses?" "I'll go find him," Olivia said. "Whether he agrees or not. He has to agree. If this company has no officer of record, it can be acquired by tomorrow." Ethan Reed raised it with his own hands. "I don't believe he can really bear to let someone else pick it up." She hung up, picked up her coat, and went out again. When Ethan returned to his apartment, it was already afternoon. He had just come back from Marcus's side after handing over all follow-up cleanup work. The capital exits were basically settled. The credit freeze was already a fact. The stock price had fallen nearly 20%. The market was watching. Partners were waiting. Management had descended into chaos. Everything was moving according to the script. He took off his coat and was about to pour a glass of water when the doorbell rang. Ethan paused. He did not need to look to know who it was. The security on this floor was strict. Not many people could come straight up and ring his doorbell. He walked over and opened the door. Olivia stood outside. She looked even more haggard than she had that morning. But there was something different in her eyes. Not panic. Not pleading. A sharpness he had not seen in her for a long time. Like when he had first met her. Back when she had been dead broke but refused to admit defeat. Again. Ethan did not seem inclined to let her in. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. Olivia took a step forward directly, forcing him to move back half an inch and leave a gap. She seized the opportunity and squeezed inside. Standing in the entryway and looking back at him, Julian Hayes ran. She went straight to the point. Ethan raised an eyebrow and said nothing. He closed the door, walked over, sat on the sofa, and lifted his glass for a sip of water. His posture was relaxed enough that it did not seem like he was facing a former partner. The officer of record change got stuck. He resigned without going to the in-person signing. Olivia said, standing before him. "You knew this day would come, didn't you? You knew he wasn't reliable. Yesterday in the lounge, when you said, 'Who the hell are you?' you had already seen through him." Ethan put down the glass and lifted his eyes to her. "So?" Olivia stood before him, both hands hanging at her sides. Her posture was no longer as broken as it had been that morning. Her back had straightened again. Her shoulders had opened. Like a bamboo stalk that had been bent for a long time finally springing upright. "I'm here to ask you for two things. First, take the officer of record position back. The company has no registered officer now. All external affairs are paralyzed. Second." She paused, and her voice lowered. "I will issue an internal open letter and attribute all the credit that has been blurred over the years back to you. The board will also make adjustments. If you're willing, I can transfer all executive authority to you." Ethan looked at her. And finally, a trace of movement appeared in his eyes. He had not expected her to say this. He thought she would continue begging him to bring capital back. Continue crying that the company was about to collapse. Continue using the affection of the past 7 years to try to move him. But she did none of that. She skipped every middle step and placed the core problems directly on the table. Officer of record vacant. Company paralyzed. Credit blurred. Power imbalanced. Seeing that he did not speak, Olivia continued. "You pulled out the capital. The company is now only an empty shell. No officer of record. No money. No credit. The next step is being broken up and acquired. Can you accept letting outsiders take what you built with your own hands so cheaply?" Ethan leaned back lightly into the sofa, his gaze resting on her face. He had known her for 7 years. He had seen her full of spirit. Seen her break down crying. Seen her grit her teeth while fighting desperately to close her first big deal. At this moment, she stood before him with no tears in her eyes. Only the stubbornness of someone who had fallen to the bottom and found her footing again. For an instant, he was dazed. It was as if he saw the woman from 7 years ago, crouched on the balcony of an apartment building, smoking while worrying over the ledger, yet never saying she would give up. "Are you done?" he asked. Olivia did not retreat. "I'm done. Do you agree?" Ethan stood. He was more than half a head taller than her, looking down at her from above. There was one step between them. The light overhead fell down, making both expressions clear. "I can take the officer of record position back," he said. Olivia's eyes brightened sharply, but his next sentence extinguished that brightness at once. But there is only one condition. Say it. Ethan looked down at her, saying each word slowly. You withdraw from the decision-making level. Starting today. Your relationship with this company is limited to your identity as a shareholder. All operations, management, and external affairs will no longer pass through you. Olivia's body swayed slightly as if struck by something. But she steadied herself quickly, bit her lip, and nodded. Fine. Ethan looked at her in silence for several seconds. He thought she would bargain, argue, make a scene, or say, at least leave me a vice president position. But she did not. She agreed decisively. So decisively that for a moment, he almost did not recognize her. You don't feel wronged? He asked. Olivia lifted her head and met his eyes. The corner of her mouth pulled into a very faint smile. It carried bitterness, but also a kind of openness that had given everything up. What good does feeling wronged do? I watched this company grow from a few people to hundreds. I can't watch it get dismantled. If you want me to step back, I'll step back. As long as it stays alive. Ethan said nothing. He looked at her for a long time. Then he turned, walked to the desk, picked up a pen and paper, wrote a few lines, and pushed it toward her. Sign it. It was a simple agreement. She would resign from all management roles. He would take back the officer of record position. He would coordinate capital and credit matters afterward. 3 lines. Clean and sharp. Like a knife cutting through all the entanglement of the past. Olivia picked up the pen and signed her name at the bottom. When the pen tip crossed the paper, her hand trembled slightly. But the signature was still steady. After signing, she put down the pen and looked up at him. One more thing. Say it. Julian Hayes has screenshots of the change request. If he gives them to the media, public opinion will get ugly. Ethan put the agreement away. His expression indifferent. He won't dare. How do you know? Ethan walked to the window. His back to her. Afternoon sunlight came through the floor-to-ceiling window, laying a thin layer of gold across his shoulders. He relies on reputation to survive in this circle. If he dares sell those screenshots today, no one in the entire industry will dare use him tomorrow. He understands that better than anyone. Olivia froze for a second, then slowly nodded. Suddenly, she realized that Ethan's judgment of Julian had been far more accurate than hers. Yesterday, she had still treated that man as one of her people. But Ethan had seen through the disguise from the beginning. And she had been blinded by power. Unable to see anything. She stood in the living room, looking at Ethan's back. Outside the window, the light was growing dimmer. Dusk was falling. She wanted to say something, but every word stuck in her throat. In the end, she only said softly, "I'm leaving." Ethan did not turn around. The door opened and closed. Footsteps faded down the corridor until they disappeared completely. The living room returned to silence. Ethan stood by the window and watched the thin figure downstairs walk out of the building entrance. Into the dusk. Farther and farther away. Until she turned the corner and vanished from sight. Only then did he withdraw his gaze and look down at the freshly signed agreement in his hand. Wind slipped in through the crack of the window, making the paper rustle softly. Over the next 3 days, company headquarters went through an unprecedented earthquake. After Ethan retook the officer of record position, the first thing he did was issue 2 announcements. One was for internal management. It revoked the temporary officer of record change initiated on listing day, voided all related procedures, and restored Ethan Reed as the company's registered officer of record, effective immediately. The other was for the market and partners. It clarified the recent rumors regarding the officer of record change, admitted that there had been improper internal procedure, stated that it had been corrected, and announced that the relevant responsible party had departed. After the second announcement was released, market reaction split in 2. Some believed the incident had been resolved. Others questioned how serious the improper internal procedure really was. The stock price continued fluctuating at a low level and did not rebound immediately. But at least the downward plunge stopped. On the capital side, Ethan personally made the calls. The president of Anchor Capital answered quickly, his tone much more polite than before. "Mr. Reed, since you're back in control, we can pause for now. But to be honest, this incident became too big. The outside world is watching. We can't restore everything immediately. It has to happen step by step. Ethan understood that this was the most realistic outcome. Once trust was torn open, it could not be stitched back together overnight. But he did not mind. As long as the capital side did not continue pressing repayment, and as long as credit was not fully cut off, the company could catch its breath. The authorization chain was reorganized. The original decision paths for risk control, financing, and mergers and acquisitions were restored. The executives who had once said Ms. Bennett approves it changed their tune faster than anyone. When they saw Ethan, they practically wanted to walk around him. No one dared mention the word centralized authority at a time like this. As expected, Olivia did not appear again. Following the agreement, she withdrew from all decision-making meetings. She also moved out of the top-floor office and into a small room downstairs in a corner. When people occasionally passed by and saw her, they found her much quieter than before. She did not chat with people. She did not attend social functions. She only sat in that small office, reading documents and reports. Some said she was writing something. Others guessed she was preparing to leave. But no one truly knew what she was doing. As for Julian Hayes, as Ethan had predicted, he did not release any screenshots. But he did not completely disappear either. Quietly, his name appeared on another company's personnel list. His position was not low, and his compensation was not bad. As if nothing had happened and he could continue moving smoothly through the world. Until one piece of news spread through the circle. It said that a newly hired vice president at an investment company had once encouraged his former employer to change the officer of record filing to himself on listing day. Then ran the next day. As soon as the news came out, that company's board held an emergency meeting overnight. 3 days later, Julian Hayes was fired. On the day he left, Julian sat in that company's conference room with a mutual separation agreement placed before him. HR was polite and professionally smiling. But the severance amount on the agreement was so low it was almost humiliating. Julian wanted to argue. But the person across from him only said one sentence. "Mr. Hayes, with your background, we really don't dare keep you." Julian signed. When he walked out of that office building, a light rain was falling outside. He stood on the steps and looked at the gray sky, suddenly unsure where he should go next. His reputation had already rotted. People in the industry were all saying that he had used listing day to seize power, then abandoned ship. No company was willing to hire a man like that. The screenshots in his hand had originally been his final leverage. Now, they had become burning hot evidence. Whoever touched them would be finished. He called Olivia once. It rang for a long time before she answered. Her voice on the other end was cold as ice. "Julian Hayes. You still have the face to call me." Julian was silent for a few seconds. The words he wanted to say circled his mouth twice. And finally, he only said, "We should talk." "Talk about what?" "How you sold me out and then ran." Olivia laughed once. And there was no warmth in it. "Save it. I suggest you delete those screenshots. Keeping them will only make you look worse." The call was cut. The busy tone poured into his ear. One sound after another. Like a countdown bell. Julian stood in the rain, slowly lowering his phone. He stared at the screenshots on the screen for a long time. Then he pressed delete. Confirm. Clear. Not one remained. 1 week later, Olivia completed one thing. She wrote a letter. Strictly speaking, it was not a letter, but an internal analysis report more than 20,000 words long. She sorted through every key point from the company's founding to its listing. Every decision. Every turning point. Every financing round. Every crisis. All were listed on a timeline. With clear notes beside them: decision maker, executor, key contributor. At the end of the report, she attached a short paragraph. It was brief, but carried immense weight. For 7 years, the true backbone of this company was never the person standing in front. Most of what I said on stage, what I did, and the applause I received were built on a road someone else had paved for me. I owe him an explanation. This company owes him a position. She sent the report to every member of the board. That night, the board held an emergency meeting. More than a dozen people sat in the conference room. The atmosphere was much quieter than it had been on listing day. Someone read the report twice. When he looked up, his expression was complicated. Olivia sat in the corner. She did not speak. She only listened quietly. The board chair, an older industry veteran, spoke first. I won't comment on who was right or wrong in this report. But from a corporate governance perspective, certain relationships do indeed need to be straightened out again. He looked toward Ethan. Ethan sat in the middle of the conference table, his expression calm and unreadable. The board chair continued. Olivia Bennett has voluntarily submitted a written resignation from management duties. After discussion, the board accepts her decision. At the same time, we intend to nominate Ethan Reed as Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer, fully responsible for company operations. The previous CEO position will be abolished. No one in the room objected. After hearing it, Ethan did not respond immediately. He was silent for a while, his gaze sweeping across everyone present, then finally stopping on Olivia in the corner. She had her head lowered, as if looking at the pattern of the tabletop, and did not meet his eyes. He said, "I accept the nomination." Applause rose. It was not enthusiastic, but it was sincere enough. The management team let out a breath, as if finally receiving an answer that could end the turmoil. After the meeting, Ethan walked out of the conference room. Olivia stood by the window at the end of the hallway, her back to him. He walked over and stopped 2 steps behind her. "Why did you write that report?" he asked. Olivia turned. She had lost weight, and there was faint darkness beneath her eyes. But her spirit looked decent. She looked at him and smiled. That smile was different from all the ones before. Not ingratiating, not stubborn, just a very light curve. "Because it's the truth," she said. "I didn't want to admit it before. Now I do. What is yours is yours." Ethan looked at her and was silent for a few seconds. "You're just stepping out like this. Are you really okay with it?" Olivia tilted her head and thought seriously. "It would be a lie to say I'm completely okay. But I already stood at the highest point once. It didn't feel as good as I imagined. Everyone around you is praising you, but not one person can actually carry anything." She paused and moved her gaze outside the window. "Instead, standing beside the high place lets you see more clearly." Ethan did not reply. The two stood side by the window, looking at the city below. The evening light dyed the entire city gold. Traffic flowed like glowing rivers, silently moving forward. "What are your plans next?" Ethan asked. Olivia put both hands in her pockets and looked into the distance. "Take a vacation first. Then, maybe do something else. Staying in this company feels a little strange right now." Ethan turned his head and glanced at her. Her profile in the sunset was softer than when she had stood under flashbulbs on listing day. Less sharp, more peaceful. "As for this company," he said in an even voice, "when you want to come back, you can come back anytime." Olivia froze and turned to look at him. Her lips moved, as if she wanted to ask why. But the words reached her mouth and were swallowed back. She looked at him for a few seconds. In the end, she only nodded lightly and said one word. "Okay." Someone called Mr. Reed from the end of the hallway. The voice came from far away, as if there were another urgent matter. Ethan answered, then turned to leave. Behind him, Olivia suddenly said, "Ethan." He stopped. That day, her voice came from behind him, very soft. "I'm sorry." Ethan stood where he was and did not look back. After a while, he gave a soft He walked 2 more steps, then stopped and turned his face slightly, not fully turning around, leaving only a silhouette. "The company is still here. That's enough." Then he left. His footsteps gradually faded, and the hallway returned to quiet. Olivia stood alone by the window, watching that back disappear around the corner. She slowly exhaled, and the corner of her mouth curved slightly. Outside the window, the sunset was nearly gone. Only the last layer of orange-red light remained in the sky, thinly spread across the glass, warm like the lingering heat in a palm. 1 month later, order returned to company headquarters. In the 3rd week after Ethan took over, the stock price began to rebound. Capital backers returned one after another, and credit lines were partially unfrozen. After a round of management restructuring, those left were all people who did real work. The executives who had rushed to say you approve it on listing day were either gone or replaced. On the day Ethan formally took office as CEO, there was no ceremony. At the regular meeting, he said only one thing. Starting today, this company recognizes results, not positions. Whoever does the work gets the credit. That sentence later became the most widely repeated phrase inside the company. No one dared claim someone else's work again. No one dared hide behind others at critical moments. The chain of authority became clear again. Everyone knew exactly where their responsibilities began and ended. Olivia took a half-month vacation. She went to a small coastal town in the south. Stayed by the ocean. Watched the sunrise every morning. Walked along the beach at dusk. And thought about nothing. Her phone was turned off most of the time. Occasionally, she turned it on to check messages. Replied to a few necessary ones. Then turned it off again. One evening, she sat on the beach and watched the waves rush up again and again. Then retreat. Suddenly, she understood something. All of her previous problems had come from wanting too badly to prove herself. She had wanted too much to be seen. She had wanted too badly for everyone to know that Olivia Bennett was capable. So much that she was willing to believe anyone who could help her reach that goal. Even if that person had bad intentions. Even if that road led to a cliff. But now, she no longer needed to prove herself. She had fallen once. She had hurt. She had stood back up. What she needed to do next was do things that truly made her feel comfortable. After the vacation ended, she returned to the company and moved into that small office downstairs. The board gave her the title of strategic consultant. No real power. But a voice. She came to work on time every day. Occasionally attended non-decision level meetings. Offered suggestions. And shared ideas. No one circled around her anymore. But she felt lighter. Julian Hayes eventually left the city. It was said he had not gone far. But no one knew exactly where. People in the circle still occasionally mentioned his name. But their tone had changed from initial shock to contempt. A person who used trust to seize power and then abandoned ship would not be able to rise anywhere. As for Ethan and Olivia, their relationship became simpler than before. They no longer saw each other every day. Occasionally, when they met in the hallway, they would nod and say a sentence or two about work. Neither mentioned the confrontation in the coffee shop that morning. Neither mentioned the signatures on that agreement later. Some things, once turned over, were truly turned over. But both of them knew that a certain kind of trust still remained. Not the unconditional trust of the past. The kind willing to block blades and bullets for each other. It was a calmer trust, built on having seen each other's bottom line clearly. Knowing the other would not betray at a critical moment. Knowing the other had the ability to hold the situation. Knowing that if this company could keep moving forward, some part of the other person would always be supporting it. 3 months later, the company released its annual financial report. Revenue grew. Profit improved. Market value recovered to its early listing level. The media used one phrase to describe the year. Full of twists and turns. From the high point of the first listing day, to the internal power earthquake and stock price plunge, to the complete reshuffling of management, and finally to standing firm again. The company had experienced a roller coaster in less than a year. At the annual meeting, Ethan stood on stage to speak. He wore a dark gray suit and stood at the center of the platform. Behind him, the big screen rolled with annual performance data. Hundreds of employees sat below. All eyes on him. A lot happened this year, he said. His voice steady. Neither fast nor slow. Good things and bad things. But there is one thing I'm certain of. This company can still hold its annual meeting here not because of one person, but because every single person sitting here did not give up. Applause rose. He did not say too many sentimental words. He only talked about the strategic plans and goals for the next year. Practical. Clear. No empty language. The employees felt reassured listening to him because over the past few months, this was exactly the kind of person Ethan Reed had shown himself to be. No empty promises. No smooth talk. What he said, he did. After the meeting, the crowd moved out. Ethan stood at the side of the stage speaking with several department heads. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed someone still sitting in the corner. He turned his head and saw Olivia. She was seated near the edge of the last row, holding the meeting materials and looking down through them, as if waiting for everyone to leave before standing up. After Ethan finished speaking with the department heads, he walked toward her. She was sitting in the last row, hearing footsteps. She looked up. When she saw it was him, she smiled faintly. The report was good, he said. Olivia closed the materials and stood. Your speech was good too. A lot more practical than that pile of nonsense I said on stage last year. Ethan made no comment. He looked at her. There's a new project starting next week. I need someone experienced to oversee the early market outreach. Are you interested? Olivia's eyes lit up for a moment, but she quickly controlled it and deliberately said slowly, "Aren't I a strategic consultant? Why ask me about something this detailed? Strategic consultants have to work too." Ethan's face showed little expression, but the corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. "Will you do it?" Olivia looked at him. After a while, she finally laughed. The laugh was real, relaxed, and unburdened, like a wave retreating after the sea breeze passed. "I'll do it." The two walked out of the meeting room side by side. The hallway was long. Sunlight came through the floor-to-ceiling windows and made the floor bright. Ahead, a group of young employees walked toward the elevator, chatting noisily. One of them looked back, saw them, and waved with a smile. Olivia also lifted her hand with a smile. Ethan walked beside her, his pace neither fast nor slow, his gaze ahead. "The project starts next Wednesday. I'll have Marcus send you the preliminary materials." "Okay," Olivia answered, then paused and turned to look at him. "I won't steal your credit this time." Ethan turned his face and looked at her. The glance was brief, but there was more meaning in his eyes than in any look they had shared before. He said nothing, only moved his gaze forward again. But the faint curve at the corner of his mouth became a little clearer. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. It was empty inside. They walked in and stood side by side, watching the floor numbers descend one by one. "Oh," Olivia suddenly said. "What's the name of that project?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Not decided yet. Do you have a suggestion?" Olivia tilted her head and thought for a moment. "Call it 7 years." Ethan turned to look at her. Olivia met his gaze and smiled openly. "From when we started until now. It's been exactly 7 years. There were plenty of problems in the middle. But isn't it still here?" The elevator reached the first floor, and the doors slowly opened. Light poured in from outside, warm and soft, stretching their shadows long. Ethan stepped out first. After 2 steps, he turned back and saw her still standing there. So he paused. "Are you coming?" Olivia smiled and stepped forward to follow. "Coming." The two walked out of the building one after another. Outside, the sunlight was just right. The whole city glittered under the blue sky. Everything that had happened that year had been like a violent, sudden storm, blowing many things apart, into chaos, and to the ground. But after the storm, what remained was what could truly stand. The company was still there. The people were still there. The platform rebuilt from the ruins was steadier than before. Wind blew from the distance, carrying the cool breath of early fall. Ethan stood on the steps and narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at the clear blue line on the horizon. Olivia stood beside him, 1 step away, looking in the same direction. Neither spoke. But there was nothing heavy, tangled, or suffocating in that silence. Only a thin, just right warmth, like sunlight falling on skin. The 7-year road had finally arrived at an open, bright place. That's all for today's story. Remember to subscribe and leave a comment.